everyone, this is Noah, and today I'm going to go over a few things that I posted on Instagram a while back that generated a lot of feedback and discussion. Specifically, this would be a couple of videos that I made regarding generating power in two different ways for one technique. And that technique was your Gedan-Barai, your low sweep or your low block, depending on what you call it in your system. This series of videos was one that I didn't include any real explanation in either of the two videos that I posted. On Instagram, you've got a minute or less, so I generally try not to take that up too much with talking and just prefer to show a couple techniques, a drill, what have you, and then I write my explanation. But unfortunately, it doesn't always come across as well that way, and I ended up having to explain some things a little bit more in detail through a number of discussions across social media. So what I wanted to do today is go over it a little bit more thoroughly, post it on YouTube for the wider audience, and hopefully make it a little more clear what I was going for. So when you look at your Gedan-Barai or gedan-uke, most people consider the technique to be the arm that goes down. And that makes perfect sense. You're calling it a low-level something. Gedan is low level. And so obviously it's that lower level people tend to look at. And so they tend to think of, we'll ignore this hand for now, they tend to think of this part as being the technique. And they usually consider the other hand, which comes across, to be more of a cover, maybe a parry to something so that you can press it away. And when you look at it that way, the method of generating power that makes the most sense, and I will do this exaggerated, which is what I did in the first video as well. The way to generate power with your hips for that makes the most sense is to essentially twist them across in the direction of the setup position and twist them back in the direction that the hand is going to swing down. This is very much like swinging a baseball bat as far as setting it up and torquing it back in the direction it's going to go. If you are using that hand to block or to strike as your primary objective, if you need power in that lower hand, then that makes the most sense. That's the way you're going to do it. And that's the way most people are taught to generate power for that technique. For that reason, I got a lot of flack for the second power generation method. The first method we came across and swung down. The second method is the opposite of that. So instead of going back in the direction of the setup and down in the direction of the lower hand, I went forward first and reversed. So essentially the complete opposite of the first one. So if we look at the first one, again, we've got this baseball bat swing. If we look at the second one, we have more of a towel whip kind of effect. And everyone tended to agree that that makes it weaker. And it does if you are considering the low hand striking something to be your primary objective. But if you look at this hand that was basically ignored in the first method, it was a covering position before we come down. In the second method, it now becomes a strike because it is now a punch. We've turned our hips into it this way. So instead of it just being a passive covering position or a parry across to something low, now it's its own attack because this hip on that side is coming forward. So it's the exact same technique, but all of a sudden that gives me a strike. And this whipping action is still a strike. It does still have impact to it, just less than the first method. If I take a look at the bag, I've put a makeshift arm. This is just a spare obi that I've attached to it. This was essentially the second video that I posted, again without any verbal explanation. So I'm using this to illustrate an arm, and for the purposes of this, we'll call it the person's right arm, and I'm on the outside of their arm. The first method of generating power is to focus on the hand that's going low. In that case, again, pulling this way is going to pull the opponent closer to me, which will move them into my strike, especially if this is going to be a groin strike. And then I can swing this down with a pretty good force. That works very well for what it is. I can also use that, instead of striking to the groin, I can use it as an armbar, for example, where I move this across. Again, that helps me extend the arm, and then I can bring it back down so that I can actually apply an armbar to my opponent. But that is just one approach. And in Okinawan karate, there are a number of approaches to not only striking, but to attacking joints. And that's where that need for the most powerful strike possible kind of gets diminished. Depending on your focus, you may not need that. So obviously, if I'm using the arm that swings low to apply the arm bar, it needs more power because it's going to be applying the majority of the force that I need. If I'm striking low with it, again, that low arm needs my force. But if I'm not using the arm that's low, then it changes the approach that I need to generate power with. If, for example, I'm striking low and then pushing this down, I don't need to generate power in the same way. This is more of a bracing technique now. So again, considering this my opponent's right arm, if I'm on the outside, I now turn. This is a strike now that I've given power to by twisting into it. Then I pull that clear of any obstruction. I'm jamming his arm down. Now I can follow with other techniques. So I've done the exact same technique. It's still my gedan-uke or gedan-barai, but I've changed the emphasis. And if we look at a tuidi waza application, a seizing hand application, the joint lock I showed first was using the low hand to do the joint lock. But you'll see a lot in Okinawan karate joint locks done with other parts of the body. People have a tendency to classify them as a number of different techniques, but in reality it's still an arm bar. It doesn't necessarily matter how you get an arm bar. But what part of your body you use to apply the arm bar does change your body mechanic. So if I look at this at a much closer range than I did before, then it's going to change. If I'm further back, then using my arm to apply the arm bar makes more sense. Once I'm in close though, I can't get this in the right position as easily. I can get it, but I have to move my opponent or move myself to get a little more space to get it to where it needs to be. But if I'm this close, I don't necessarily need to use my arm to apply that lock. I can use my body. And you'll see this a lot in a number of kata. You see this in Naihanchi Nidan, for example. You see this in Pinan Sandan, very much the same way. Shinto has this as well. You see Goju Shiho coming up this way. Pasai even has this. Seiyonshin has this. Those can all be seen as arm bars. But instead of using your arm to apply the arm bar, you're using your arm higher up, perhaps, or your chest even. This also gets used as an arm bar. For example, if I've trapped their wrist in the crook of my elbow, for example, then when I twist this in, I'm actually applying the arm bar with my chest. And that's the type of thing that we're doing with the Gedan-Barai in this case. So, for example, we can look at the setup here as being twisting their arm. Now, if you bend and twist someone's arm, obviously you could potentially put them into a joint lock and restrain them in this manner. But when you try doing that, if it's uncomfortable, if it hurts, people have a tendency to resist that. And if their arm is bent, they will have a tendency to try and straighten it if the bent position is painful. That's just a natural reaction. So the setup can actually do that for us. We've bent their arm, perhaps. And again, this hand is up as well, so if there is a second punch, I can cover that down, do what I need to do. But I can still apply pressure and bend their arm. If they then extend it, they're giving me my arm bar now. But look at how my hips have turned. So now instead of punching with this hand like I was doing before, I'm just wrenching their arm back this way, and I've set myself up now to untwist and strike down. And when I do that, this has more power pulling than it did before. When we swung this way, the pull has very little power. It's actually relatively stationary if you look at it this way. There is some pull, but it does not travel very far. When I set up the other direction, all of my body weight is pulling my arm back now. And you can see this belt has gotten tight across my chest. This hand low is bracing the bag so it can't move forward, and I'm applying pressure from behind it. So if this were my opponent and his arm, what I've essentially done is attempted to bend his arm, he's resisted that, so he's straightened it. I now have the power I need to pull it the rest of the way straight, and when I twist this way, my shoulder comes forward. Before swinging this way, my shoulder goes back, so I can't armbar this way. When my shoulder comes forward though, it becomes the focal point for my joint lock. This low hand can still strike the groin. The groin is a fairly sensitive target. You don't necessarily need to smash it like a baseball bat. A whipping strike down to it may be sufficient, especially to get their attention away from the joint lock and make it more effective. And additionally, once you've got that arm down there, it makes it harder for them to step forward and possibly turn so that they can escape the armbar. So it's not so much a matter that one way is better than the other, one way is correct and one way is incorrect. When you look at the body mechanics for your kata and for your kihon, there may be a single standard of what you're supposed to do for the purpose of basics. But when you look at it from an application perspective, what you are doing may change the body mechanic. There's not necessarily going to be one single standard that you need to adhere to in order to accomplish your task.